We are so dedicated to today's main news story, which is changes to the rail network. We've all been on trains today.
We are living the news.
Living the dream.
So Laura is getting very excited because she is heading to Cardiff for reasons that will become clear in a moment here on Newscast. I did a little dash to Warrington Bank Quay in Cheshire, little day trip, some filming for next week. But Adam, you've scooped the lot of us because you just came to work.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't have any exciting assignments today, so I just did a selfie of myself passing through King's Cross Station.
On your way to work?
On my way to work. Passing on a tube journey I do about 58 times a week. So, but somebody who has taken this sort of thing to the absolute next level is David Brewer, who has been to every train station in Britain, taken a photo of them all, published them in a book, and now, best of all, is on Newscast. Hello, David.
Hello.
Hi, so there's one question, David. Why?
Why did I do that? I've
Yeah.
always been interested in railways from a young boy in the 1960s when I would go train spotting. It was steam. Never lost interest. And I decided, first of all, to travel on every line in the country, which I achieved. Having done that, and I'd photographed then about 700 stations, I decided that I would then try and visit every station, over 2,500, photograph them, and I think that I achieved about 2011.
And to be clear, to go to every station, that means getting off the train, actually being on the platform for at least...
Getting off the train, taking a photograph, and then either getting the next train, or in some cases where there was only one train, I may have to walk to another station to get to get the train.
What was the hardest one to get to?
There's a station called Shippier Hill. It's just about 10 miles east of Ely, which just has one train a day, or it had at the time. It may have changed now. On a Saturday, so I had to. There was no buses or any other means of getting there. Get a taxi from Ely to the station. Get about an hour before the train came. Took the photographs and then got the train back. And there's been many others where I've had to walk several miles, but it's something I enjoy doing.
There's lots of discussion about the railway network today. Is there something you've discovered about the railway network in all your travels that is just kind of not visible to us fair weather users of the railway network who only use it for work every now and then or for leisure travel?
I think one of my concerns, if we're just relating it to the new HS2 line, I would prefer money to be spent on either reopening new lines and new stations.
Well, David, thank you very much for joining us at the start of this episode of Newscast. And you've now given Chris loads of ideas of places to go with any questions. So he should probably bung you like 50 quid for that. Thanks very much.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you.
Safe travels.
Welcome to Newscast.
Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam off the Underground and in the studio.
And it's Chris, back from Cheshire, also in the studio.
And it's Laura in Cardiff, not in the studio, but confusingly in Wales, to talk about Northern Ireland.
Oh yeah, who are you going to be talking to about Northern Ireland in Wales?
Well, in a few minutes, we'll be hearing from the Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, the Irish Prime Minister, who is in Wales to talk to other ministers from different parts of the UK about the relationship between those two countries, which, at the moment is so straightforward. Nothing much going on to talk about.
I'm sure the phrase Article 16 will not materialise at all. Oh yeah, it will be the entire subject of the interview. Now, talking about the relationship between...
talking about the rugby, that's all.
Now, you talk about the relationship between two countries. Today has all been about the relationship between cities in England and how they're connected by rail. And we've got London, Birmingham, Nottingham, Derby, Leeds, Manchester, Sheffield, Nottingham, all those places Bradford have all been in the mix because the government introduced its new integrated railways plan today. A long-awaited document, much previewed and leaked as well. But Chris, there's loads of things in it, and you actually basically need a bit of a map to understand it.
You do. So we'll show our viewers a map, and we'll paint a picture of a map for those listening to the pod. So the Leeds leg of HS2 is being scrapped, which has not got down particularly well with lots of people in that part of West Yorkshire. There is going to be no new Northern Powerhouse rail line between Leeds and Manchester, although that journey will get quicker, the government emphasises. As far as HS2 is concerned, the bit between Crewe and Manchester will happen. The bit between Birmingham and the East Midlands will happen. We already know they're building the bit between London and Birmingham. And then there will be this new Northern Powerhouse rail line between Warrington, where I happened to be earlier on, Manchester and Marsden in West Yorkshire. With the government making the argument that it's cracking on with stuff quicker and more cheaply, but plenty of people saying it's a sellout, and plenty of people in the north of England reckoning they're not getting what they hope to get. Shall we hear from somebody in the north of England?
Yeah, one of those people who's a little bit annoyed is the Labour Mayor of West Yorkshire, Tracy Brabin.
It is a betrayal of the north, and it's a betrayal of the people I represent in West Yorkshire. Only what feels like months ago, the Prime Minister stood in front of Stephenson's Rocket in Manchester and promised a new rail line, the Northern Powerhouse Rail.
The interesting thing about this from a political point of view, isn't it, is that Boris Johnson and the Tories made such a feature of making these big promises to the north of England. And even, I'll always remember the morning after the election, he made this speech and he talked directly to people who'd voted Tory for the first time in areas that had never talked before. And he talked about how the pencil might have hovered over the box, but he would keep his promises to them. Now, let's be clear, the government's spending loads and loads and loads of money on improving railways across a lot of the country. But that's the problem here, isn't it? They're not doing what they promised they would. And you guys have been looking more closely at the details of it. Does it stack up to something that feels like a promise that hasn't just been delivered?
I think you're right, Laura. That sense that Boris Johnson has always tried to rebrand that idea of what being a Conservative is, what being a Conservative Prime Minister is, particularly to those people who voted Conservative for the first time and may or may not be tempted to do that again. And we've seen, haven't we, this whole flurry of newspaper front pages in the north of England, the Manchester Evening News, the Yorkshire Post, the Northern Echo and others, all saying that this is an absolute sellout. And yet the government, Adam, confronts itself with a situation where they are spending shed loads of money on a big long-term project and still getting hammered for saying it's not enough because it doesn't match up with what they were originally saying they would do.
Although we have to be careful about the money because there's a headline figure of £96 billion, which is shed loads of money to invest in something in this country over a long period, admittedly. Actually, quite a lot of those billions are things that were being spent already on the bits of HS2 that are going to go ahead. So there's a little asterisk next to that 96 billion. The other asterisk against the kind of the new Tory voters is, remember, there were constituencies that this bit of HS2 were going to go through that weren't going to have any train stations in them.
They would get the downsides, but not the upsides.
Exactly. And so there will be new Tory voters who will be really happy tonight that railway they hated is not going to go through their back garden.
And the places it was going to, broadly speaking, in urban England, are Labour strongholds.
But you're totally right, though, that what Boris Johnson is very good at is selling a big, dramatic, easily branded, bold thing. What maybe you could say he's less good at doing is the more nuanced, complicated, it's not the big shiny thing, but there are smaller, shinier things coming faster. And here's how he attempted to try and sell that message today.
These are massive, massive gains. And what they will also produce is the commuter benefits that we want to see. So we're not just digging huge swathes of new rail across virgin countryside and through peaceful villages, which is what some of the critics say we should be doing more of. We're doing a bit of that. There's no doubt about it. We're building over 100 miles of high-speed line, but we're also improving and upgrading the commuter networks to shorten journey times in the East Midlands, in the West Midlands, and across the whole north of the country.
And I guess the crux of this, Laura, whether it's rail and the announcement today or anything else at the moment, at this stage in a parliament between general elections, is this where a government at any time has to start turning its rhetoric, its big grand promises into reality and the point where voters will then come to a judgment?
Well, that's right. And this government has been very conscious of that in the last few months. I think increasingly conscious of that because, of course, the pandemic basically slammed the brakes on anything else that they wanted to do. Of course, quite understandably, but it meant pretty much the first 2 years of the administration. And we're almost at that 2-year anniversary, whether you want to celebrate it or whether or not you want to commiserate over it. Of course, that's up to you, newscasters. But we are almost 2 years in now. And it is absolutely at the moment, especially when it comes to big projects, if it's not happening now, it's not going to be done before the next general election. I mean, when it comes to railway lines, I mean, if you don't get spades in the ground very, very, very soon, then people aren't even going to be able to see that it might be ready or might be happening in the next, 5, 10 years, because these kinds of things don't happen quickly at all. And I think in the context of the fact that government's been taking lots and lots and lots of knocks in the last couple of weeks, there is real trepidation among Tory MPs about whether or not they really have got a grip on what they want to do as a government. And frankly, what a lot of people are starting to say is whether or not actually, and of course, Number 10 would dispute this, and Mary backers of Boris Johnson would dispute this very firmly, but a lot of Tory MPs are starting to say, maybe actually we might be squandering some of this enormous majority, because it's only once in a generation, sometimes only once in every several generations, that a majority as big as 80 actually comes along. Why does that matter, guys? Well, because without a huge majority, you can't do controversial, difficult things, because you're always having to worry about sneaking things through, winning votes in the House of Commons. And this is kind of the moment you got a majority of 80 that a party would be really, really, really steaming ahead.
Well, you talk about Tory MPs and you talk about social care, and I think it would be very interesting over the weekend at the start of next week to see if there are complaints from the backbenches about social care, because Laura, as you were hinting at there, we discovered yesterday when some more technical details about this cap on care costs were announced, that people who are getting funding from their local authority for their care, that funding will not contribute to their journey towards the £86,000 cap. So reinforcing this criticism that is aimed at it, that actually it's a thing to help people who've got lots of assets and lots of money already, rather than the poorest or people on kind of lower middle incomes. And also the key thing about this change to the cap is it's got to be passed through legislation. It's going to be an amendment to the Health and Social Care Bill, which is back in the House of Commons on Monday and Tuesday. So there is an opportunity for MPs, Conservative MPs in red wall seats or seats with lots of voters who would be affected by this, to make their concerns known. And in politics, things come in threes. Laura said the first two, sleaze, HS2, and along comes the third.
And again, Laura, it's that gap, isn't it, between expectation and rhetoric and how reality might look.
Well, that's right. And I don't recall Boris Johnson standing on a stage saying, we fixed social care, but whispering, actually, by the way, if you've got a bit of money but not that much, actually, this isn't really going to help you. Who recalls that? Absolutely no one. And, it's the kind of thing that, given the mood in Westminster this week, it might just be by this time next week that we're actually talking about a huge rebellion over the government's social care plans. Now, who knows? I haven't been in Westminster today. I don't know if the chatter building among MPs. But I have to say, it's not just red wall MPs who are worried about or who are not pleased with how this proposal has actually emerged. So we'll see what the next few days bring. But it was interesting to note today immediately just how very publicly disappointed the man who designed this system, Andrew Dilnot, who of course we don't need to introduce to newscasters, somebody who's a giant brain policy expert who basically invented this kind of system where care costs would be capped a long time ago. He was pretty scathing today in his criticism of the way that the government is proposing to do it.
And also it's worth remembering that this cap, even this less good version of this cap, that as people perceive it, is still better than the current system. It's just not as amazing as if they'd gone for the full plans it was come up with by Andrew Dilnot a few years ago. Right, Laura, you're now going to speak to Micheál Martin, the Taoiseach. Just in a couple of sentences, explain why is he worth speaking to tonight on Newscast?
Well, newscasters will remember, in the last couple of weeks, there's been a real build-up of tension over whether or not the UK is going to start an official legal bust-up with the EU over what they see as the over-the-top, overzealous implementation of the rules that govern Northern Ireland that were agreed as part of the Brexit deal. That would be the so-called triggering of Article 16. And in the last couple of weeks, the Irish have said it would be unwise, it would be reckless to do that. But was he taking quite such a dramatic tone when I talked to him tonight?
I think people, genuinely in the North, from my last engagement, which was only late last week, people genuinely want this resolved by agreement. And I think Lord Frost, to be fair to him, went to Northern Ireland 2 days this week, discuss these issues with people on the ground as well. So I think a genuine effort is clearly being made now in respect of endeavouring to get this resolved by agreement.
But is it reasonable that someone, for example, who lives in Barnsley in England would have to get a rabies jab for their dog if they wanted to go on holiday in the north of Ireland? Is it reasonable that somebody selling second-hand agricultural machinery from somewhere in England over to Northern Ireland has inspectors crawling under their vehicle with torches to make sure they've scraped off every single piece of soil?
Well,
is it reasonable?
Well, again, I think you can isolate examples like that. In the generality of trade, I think it will be far more streamlined and efficient. And indeed, part of the package that Sefcovic has brought forward is designed to minimise all of those checks, particularly SPS checks, medicine, and so on. But of course, remember, the British government signed this agreement with the European Union for a reason, Brexit, and Brexit clearly has changed the landscape. And this is a unique solution to the challenges that Brexit created, if you like, in terms of that the sets of relationship between Britain, Ireland, Northern Ireland. And it's never going to be perfect, but it's important that we don't allow perfect to become the enemy of the good.
But for many people, it just seems to be, over the top. And yes, the EU has put some new proposals on the table, but when they say they would cut 80% of checks, they mean 80% of checks if the protocol was being fully implemented.
Well, again, the European Union is there to negotiate, to engage, and to minimise the issues. And Vice President Sefcovic went to the north. I've spoken to him before he went to the north. He's very keen to get this resolved. I spoke to Angela Merkel a year ago, who said to me, the last thing we want is an abundance of checks. We want to minimise checks.
That's what's happening,
and
isn't it?
No, it's not. I think that's overstated now, Laura, but to some degree. There's not an abundance of checks. And it can get resolved with goodwill on all sides.
What happens if this cannot be resolved? The UK has been clear. If there isn't a significant move on the EU side, the UK is absolutely explicit that it may well push the button on a legal dispute. Article 16 is the technical name of the mechanism. You said it would be reckless and unwise for the UK to trigger Article 16. Why?
Well, my own view is that unilateralism never works, and I'm very encouraged by what has transpired this week and last week between Lord Frost and Maros Sefcovic. And Lord Frost himself said that this can be agreed.
But why would it be unwise and reckless to do that?
That comment was made some weeks ago, when indications were that a unilateral move was going to be made to just trigger it without really serious engagement on the issues. I now believe that what's happening is good and positive in terms of the engagement. It's the very type of thing I want to see that I hadn't been seeing. And this was prior to COP26, and when I was at COP26, I was hearing different messages from other European leaders in terms of what London was saying. But I'm glad to say that the mood music has changed. Now, there's still a long way to go, and people have to see the substance of and the detail of the issues being reconciled, but I believe they can.
A year ago, we spoke, in fact, almost exactly a year ago, we spoke when the UK and the EU were trying to get the Brexit deal finalised. A year ago, you said that the UK had to knuckle down to get a deal. What's your message to the UK now?
It was Christmas Eve in the end.
It was.
I'd say don't leave it to Christmas Eve this year. It's your course way, but I mean, I think my message is, one, the European Union sincerely wants to engage and get a resolution of this. Of that, I have no doubt. And I think the UK government should really accept those bona fides and engage likewise with the European Union. I believe they are now. I think Lord Frost's comments this week were helpful in that regard.
But you make it sound, though, as if the UK doesn't quite believe that the EU is serious. And certainly on the UK side, many people would say to you, if the EU seriously wants to get this resolved, there are steps that they could take that are far more radical, that would budge far further than what they've put on the table so far.
Well, they've gone very far. I mean, I would be surprised by that description of it, because most people in Europe, actually, quite a number of countries, thought that Maros Sefcovic went too far in terms of the package that he offered.
But it sounds as if you think this might all be solved sort of rather easily. And what would the EU do if the UK does follow through with its warnings?
Well, I think the EU president has made very clear to the United Kingdom its perspective on that. I don't think now is the time to be speculating as to what would or wouldn't happen. But remember, this was an agreement that was signed not too long ago between the British government and the European Union in good faith, and the protocol and the withdrawal agreement was agreed in advance of the full trade agreement, and in essence in sequence, and that's the challenge and the difficulties for everybody.
But some people have speculated it, and your colleague Simon Coveney in your own government threatened that the whole trade deal might be a casualty if this went ahead.
Well, a number of weeks ago, there was a different atmosphere governing this situation, and there was all sorts of rumours and vibes and communications being articulated to and fro. Since then, that has calmed down somewhat, and there is a better appreciation, I think, now of where these talks can go.
If this cannot be resolved, what is the worst case scenario?
Well, again, I don't want to be entering into a doomsday scenario here, or making comments that might be perceived as threatening, in terms of what could happen. But I think the implications are clear to all of us in the sense that this was a negotiated agreement over a year ago, or the guts of a year ago, and that there's a number of relationships here. There's the European Union-UK relationship. Do we really want that to go into a period of stress?
I'm a bit frustrated that this has become such an issue.
I am frustrated. I don't think this needs to be where it is right now, and I think it can get resolved. I passionately believe in that. And in my last meeting at Chequers with the British Prime Minister, we did focus on some of the potential in the British-Irish relationship that we should be working on, but these issues that are not resolved arising out of the protocol and Brexit are really getting in the way of a full flowering of that relationship into the future.
Do you feel as if he is someone actually that you've got any affinity with? What's he like as an opposite number?
Oh, he's a very pleasant person, a very, very easy enough person to engage with and to discuss issues with, I have to say that.
And a recent profile of you said that when you were younger you used to do impressions of people. Do you do impressions of any politicians?
Privately.
Any impression? Do you put an impression of Boris Johnson? Many people try.
No, I haven't done one on Boris, but I watch though, and I'm impressed with how he's a very good sort of, I think, in presentation at times in terms of his engagement with people on the street and so on. But I haven't ever tried to impersonate him yet,
Who do you try to impersonate?
I'm working on it. Sorry?
Who do you try to impersonate? Donald Trump, Joe Biden, any of them?
No, don't go too far now. I got into trouble on one interview when I took off someone many years ago, so I don't need to go back there, So I used to do that when I was young. And I suppose that's just something in my persona. I was always interested in mannerisms from other people, and I did. My school teachers were my favourites. I'd sort of take them off when there was a free class or something like that,
Any particular one that you can tell us about?
Teachers?
Yeah.
Oh, my maths teacher in particular, yeah. But I'm not going there now.
You're not going to get me to do an invitation. I thought I might be able to tempt you. But just lastly, a lot of people will be watching this on our podcast Newscast and listening to it on Newscast, which of course used to be Brexitcast. And the number of hours that people in the UK have heard talking about the Irish and the British relationship in terms of Brexit. What's that been like for you as an Irish politician? I mean, has it just been annoying sometimes that it's sort of always become caught up in this, United Kingdom process, and you've ended up being, do you see it sort of Ireland as having been, a victim of all of this, or do you get frustrated by being stuck in the middle between the EU and the UK?
I don't get frustrated. I mean, I do worry about it because I think I'm a passionate believer in membership of the European Union for Ireland. I accept fully the democratic wishes of the British people to leave the European Union. But to me, Britain has contributed a lot to the European Union and to Europe more generally, has an awful lot to contribute. We need Britain's heft in terms of the geopolitical situation globally. So that's why I genuinely believe there has to be greater harmony and a really strong, constructive alignment of interests between the European Union and the United Kingdom. And then in terms of the British-Irish relationship, it's a wonderfully rich relationship in sport, in families. I mean, I have many cousins living in the UK. My uncles fought with the British Army in World War II. One prisoner of war in Japan for 3 years in the Changi prison in Singapore by the Japanese when Singapore fell, And these are the kind of normal, natural ties between Ireland and Britain that are there for decades and centuries. So we do really, I think, need to overcome this Brexit challenge, which has been a blip in all of that, and move on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, let's compare notes. Laura, what do you think were, as we'd say in the trade, the top lines from that interview?
Well, I think we just heard the Taoiseach there really try to be very conciliatory. I can't say that word. Conciliatory. After a few weeks of really quite hot tempers in terms of how things have been between the EU and the UK, and indeed some of his Irish colleagues like Simon Coveney, who, you know, not so long ago was saying, well, if the UK triggers Article 16, then the whole trade agreement might come crashing down. So I think he was genuinely, you know, trying to add to what some people have seen as a more constructive environment in the last couple of weeks. But you could still tell, though, he sort of said he was a bit frustrated. He said the UK needs to believe that the EU really is trying to solve this with goodwill. So I think, in a funny way, he's also that kind of politician. You know, if you talk to other people about him, he's very amenable, somebody who kind of wants everyone to get on. But if you take some of that out, he was also kind of saying, look, the EU's put proper concrete proposals forward, believe that that's what we're going to offer you, but take that opportunity, or very diplomatically, things might get quite sticky.
So I wonder where we are
think?
now, Laura and Adam, versus where we were before we heard that interview, or where we were, say, a week ago. Are we substantively in a different place or not?
Well, he's definitely de-escalating the Irish position after, as Laura said, Simon Coveney, his deputy, escalated it a few weeks ago. And he sort of suggested that the UK has been doing that privately, diplomatically, with other people around the world as well. Now, whether that's true, whether that's a tactic he is deploying to reduce the temperature, and actually the UK hasn't been doing that, then I also wonder if there'll be a bit of blowback from that, because David Frost and Boris Johnson like to look at like the hard men in this. And so if they've got people on their backs going, hang on, have you dialed down these threats about Article 16? That could cause them a little bit of a domestic political problem. Also, I just think two other little things I scribbled down. And he was sort of joking, but he sort of meant it. It was like, please don't make it another Christmas Eve crisis. And he's a well-known impressionist, and he denied that he's been working on a Boris Johnson impression.
But what's interesting as well is that in the last few days I've been talking to people in the UK side about this, because there have been these kind of question marks about, oh, well, when there was all that rhetoric and sabre rattling, was that really mean? Did it really mean that we were about to push the button? Has the UK really changed its mind? You know, we've seen Lord Frost has been in Northern Ireland this week, seeming to at least be seen to be trying to get to a deal. But I've talked to a few people in government in the last 48 hours who've said, look, no, our position has not changed. So basically, forget about the rhetoric here and there. The position isn't any different. Don't think this has all gone away. Don't think we suddenly think that the EU's proposals are going to fix it all. And you wonder if someone in government suggested to me today, quite casually, but suggested there was maybe a bit of wishful thinking going on. Because actually Lord Frost in the Lords today was very clear to basically say, look, our position hasn't changed. And it was also suggested to me by someone who's been talking to government about this, who's pretty well placed, that actually the position hadn't changed, but the government, they suggested, had held off on cracking on with Article 16 because the sleaze saga had gone on for so long, and they didn't want to open up a new front of, I was going to say a rude word, that would be terrible, a new tricky domestic front, a new front politically, until that was somehow fading from view.
Picking through every syllable. It's taking me back to Brexitcast. Brexitcast never quite leaves us, even with our relatively newish branding of Newscast.
No. Anyway, Laura, that was a great interview. Thank you for rustling up the Taoiseach for us on this episode of Newscast. And we'll be back with another one very soon. Bye.
Bye.
Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.